If you look at the data, starting an early stage startup is incredibly hard. You are, from a probabilistic standpoint, going to fail. So what's given you conviction to go out and do this? How self-aware are you around what do you really have conviction in and what do you not have conviction in? And are you willing to make the hard decisions when those things pop up? Because startups are never a straight path.
Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Healthtech Podcast. Today, I have with me Sam Toole, who's a partner at Primary Ventures. Sam, welcome to the Healthtech Podcast. How you doing, mate?
I'm good, James. Looking forward to being here and appreciate it.
You're very welcome, sir. Whereabouts are you speaking to us from today, Sam?
I am in the tri-state area, so I work in New York City, but live in New Jersey. And you got me up early this morning. It's 7:40 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So,
oh man, you're not one of these. Surely, if you're a tech bro, you've got to be waking up at 4 a.m. You've already done like a marathon and a bit of meditation. You've read a book. Like, no, is that not your life?
I have a almost 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, so that is definitely not my life. I did wake up at 6, but that was not my own doing. That was one of them waking up. So no marathons, no books for me.
Shame. But one day you can aspire to that morning routine, I guess, and can't we all?
One day, man. Those TikTok memes and stuff are insufferable. If you ask me, but it's just my opinion.
No, I agree. It's a funny one. Like, I sort of get proud of myself if I'm just out of bed without looking at my phone. Like, that's just that's a win. And I think setting the bar low just so I can get that early win in the day. And even then, I fail most days because I've checked my emails before I've even got out of bed. But
exactly.
Anyway, representing the normal guy here, Sam, we are. Cool, man. So, yeah, looking forward to this, dude. I've had a look at, I was on your website earlier today. I was looking at your portfolio. I was looking at the approach. I've looked at, some of the stuff you've been putting out on LinkedIn. It's Primary Ventures looks interesting, looks really interesting, especially some of the investments that you've made. Looking forward to getting into this. And hearing from you a little bit about like what you look for and how you make investments and all that sort of stuff. I know people listening will be really interested. So I guess I want to get to know you a little bit first. So for the benefit of me and our listeners, why don't you tell us a bit about you, a bit about your story?
Sure. So I have what I'd say is probably a non-traditional route into venture. I was giving you the long version. I was born and raised in Massachusetts. I grew up on a small island called Nantucket Island, which is really known as a tourist destination. But in the winter, it's about 10,000 people, and you're 30 miles out to sea. So it's actually a pretty small rural community. I had no idea what VC was until after college. So it wasn't one of these things where, what I want to be when I grow up, I want to be a venture capitalist. That wasn't even on my radar. My dad built houses. My mom is a lawyer, so it was not something that was on my radar. I, in college, started a business. So I ran a surf school.
Nice.
Basically, I used to landscape in high school.
At
a certain point, I was like, I don't want to keep landscaping. This is not fun. I like surfing. I've been surfing. I surfed till I was, started surfing when I was 10 years old, and would teach surf lessons on the side. And in college, instead of doing the typical internship stuff, I decided to start a surf school with a friend from Nantucket. If you go to Nantucket today, that surf school still operates. My buddy still runs it. Yeah, if you go to Nomad Beach, check out ACK Surf. And I did that all through college, and it was great. It was like the first sort of real entrepreneurship. I always say it's like the way that I actually started to learn how to sell, instead of doing the walk up to people's doors and knock and sell knives. It was walk up to people's umbrellas and try to convince them to let me take their 8-year-old, 10-year-old out into the water for a surf lesson. And it was a great business. It was probably in a lot of ways probably one of the best jobs I'll ever have. I sat on the beach all day. I got to surf when the waves were good. But the last year I was involved, we had 10 instructors. I sat on the beach most of the time, and other people taught lessons, and I got to hang out. When we were doing that, we started to sell merchandise as well, and clothes, and ended up starting a second business when I was in college, which was an e-commerce brand. Actually convinced a guy that we taught surf lessons to invest in the business. And so my senior year of college, and I was an English major, so it's not like I was a designer or anything like this. Really taught myself how to design, figured out how to manufacture clothes. We did stuff over in China, like board shorts and things like that were all sort of cut and sew. And then a bunch of custom t-shirts and hoodies and hats and all that sort of stuff. And upon graduating, sort of ran both businesses and did that for the first year-ish out of college. And it was going well. We had done, I don't know, 300, 400 grand of sales on the e-commerce side. And we said, okay, I think this could be a thing. We have to go raise more capital. And I found myself in the predicament where I had started at the surf school with a great friend of mine, great guy to start a surf school with. We started the e-commerce business together, and fast forward a year plus into it, or a year and a half into it, and sort of had this realization: great guy to start a surf school with, not a great guy to run an e-commerce business with. We were living together. We had moved up to Boston. We tried to figure it out. Looking back, of course, I approached it in all of the wrong ways. Like thinking about all the conversations we have with, founders today, and how do you go out and, approach these sort of hard conversations. I did everything wrong in that scenario.
In what way? Can you talk about that?
I just, let it boil up to a point where I was too frustrated. I wasn't direct enough with my feedback. We didn't do a good job of divvying up, responsibilities and just being honest with each other around what were strengths and weaknesses. And then, got to this moment where it's like, okay, we're going to have the big conversation. And around what I tried to do was, hey, look, the surf school, it's a great business. Why don't we do an equity swap? You own most of the surf school. I'll own most of the e-commerce business. We'll figure this out. We'll each own a little bit of both. But you'll let me use your equity to basically go, put it to work, and I can raise some more capital, and I'll figure this sort of stuff out. And that's a big conversation. That's a challenging thing. And I just didn't approach it in the right way. Looking back, and
it's hard when you're young, and it's hard with a friend as well.
Exactly. And we were living together, and it all sort of unraveled, and it became personal really quickly.
Exactly,
and that was just hard. And we ended up, basically, I sold him my chunk of the surf school. We shut down the e-commerce business, basically returned the capital to the guy who had invested in it. I found myself at 23, 24, living in Boston, having done no sort of formal internships, ran a surf school, ran an e-commerce business, being like, what the hell am I going to do?
Interesting spot. Yeah, interesting spot.
And I was fine. I was fine. I knew long term I'd be able to figure something out, but I really wasn't sure what that was. I ended up during that time doing a bit of sort of consulting work with some other e-commerce businesses. It's actually how I met one of the other partners at Primary. We were both 23, 24-year-old guys running e-commerce businesses in Boston at the time. And this is like 2012, 2013, 2014. There weren't a lot of us in that camp. And both of our businesses didn't work out, but we became fast friends as we were figuring all this sort of stuff out and sorting it out. So I did a little bit of work with him. I did a stint at a small private equity firm. It's one of those, I knew a guy who knew a guy who was like, hey, we're looking to bring someone on for a project, come help us buy, revenue cycle management companies. And I was sitting there cold calling revenue cycle management companies in like middle of nowhere, Michigan and Indiana, trying to convince them to sell to us. I very quickly realized I didn't want to do that. And during that time, I ended up reconnecting with an alumni from the college I went to who was running a software development firm in the MIT Kendall area. And I had known him in college a bit. He was older, but he was one of these guys who would come back to campus and, talk about entrepreneurship. And I used to talk to him about the surf school and the e-commerce business. And he said, "Hey, look, we need to hire a first salesperson. You've sold things, like, you know how to do this. You're adaptable. You're young. Why don't you come work for me, and you'll learn about software development and tech, and we'll just figure it out." And I did that, and was there for a couple of years. It was a really interesting place to be because, unlike a lot of software development firms that grow relatively slowly, we went from like 10 people to 150 in 2 years. It was all custom mobile software, selling into sort of two buckets. One, the Fortune 2000. So, we'd go talk to Fidelity, and Fidelity would be like, "Young people aren't using our mobile app. Help us solve this problem." We'd be like, "Great, here, we'll do this big multi-million-dollar project." And then we did a bunch of work with startups. And that was where I sort of got introduced to VCs, because I was like, okay, I'll go befriend a bunch of VCs because maybe their portfolio companies need help with software development. And we would do a bunch of work with Series A, Series B companies on that side. That company grew really quickly. I sort of, a couple years in, said, I don't think I want to keep doing this consulting thing. It's, great. It's really interesting. I get to learn about a bunch of different industries and meet with a lot of smart people, but you're not going deep in the same way. And I sort of thought about two different things. One, I became interested in VC at the time and spoke to a bunch of people, and people were like, "Yeah, like, you don't really have the right experience here. Like, go and operate in a tech company. You've done some things that are entrepreneurial, but you haven't worked in an environment that is, venture backed." And so I went and started I took that to heart and said, okay, I'm not going to go really pursue this, to go try to be an analyst somewhere. And ended up talking to a bunch of VCs I became friends with over the years. And they did the thing that I would do today. And they pitched me on portfolio companies. And I was having coffee with a friend, and she said, "Hey, you should go work for one of these two portfolio companies of ours." And one was much larger, a company called Iora Health, and the other was a business called Nomad Health, which was 4 people at the time. And Iora was in Boston, and they just didn't have a role that was interesting to me at the time. So I spoke to them, and Nomad was based in New York City and was really early. And so funny, I ended up not even traveling down to New York. This was pre-COVID, pre-Zoom, pre all this sort of stuff. Did a bunch of virtual interviews, got offered a job to be the first salesperson at the company. And I said, sure, I'll take it. And I was there for about 4 years, built and ran the sales team, and then ran a business line as a GM as we went seed to Series B, like 0 to $75 million run rate business.
Wow.
So was a bunch of really, really great learnings, and truly the like trial by fire. Like, I'd say my job title didn't change every 6 months, but like my job fundamentally changed every 6 months, if not faster, just because things would break. And I would always be the person to say, I'll keep doing my current job, but like I'll do this other stuff as well. And was there for about 4 years. And it was just, the business was different at that point. It was, I'd been the 5th person. We were 150 people. And I sort of got an itch to do something else. I had been at that point continued to be interested in the world of VC. I probably spoke to 50 VC firms over a 9-month period. I really wasn't totally sure what I wanted to do. I was like, I don't think I want to stay here exactly. The business is looking a little bit different. I either want to do something earlier, or I want to do something later. I took the GMAT. I was like, maybe I want to go to business school. Maybe I want to do VC. Maybe I want to go operate a different business that's just at a different scale. I I had a lot of conversations with a lot of people, and at a certain point sort of had this realization that I kept thinking about things in the terms of, well, if I go work for another great business and it scales and IPOs or gets to, a series D, E, F, I can then pivot and become a VC. Or I'll go to business school and I can do a couple internships and then I'll jump in to become a VC. I kept having this realization that I was like, okay, well, if that's really what I want to do, like, why bother doing those other things? I didn't need to leave Nomad. I didn't need to do that. The role was still interesting. I was like, I'm just going to stick it out. And if I spend a year trying to get a job in VC and I can't do it, say la vie, that may just be the reality. And like, I can go focus and do something else. I ended up getting a job at Primer and have been there for about 4.5 years, which has been great, amazing, a really interesting ride, which I'm sure I can talk more about the firm. But I think what's been particularly interesting, and I'll pause for a moment, is like I joined, we were in fund 2, we were 8 people. Fast forward 4.5 years, we're about 50 people in fund 4 now. When I joined, we had 160 million under management. We have about $1 billion under management today. So it's been, although this is less typical on the VC side of things, like it's felt like a startup in a lot of ways because we've grown and changed and shifted. I started as a principal working in, really focusing on enterprise software and healthcare. I now spend all my time doing early stage healthcare investing. Can talk more about how we think about that. But it's been a very interesting journey, and also I had 1 week in the office. Right before COVID. Then it was COVID. Everything went remote. I think as many of the listeners and yourself probably remember, like the world shut down for a couple months. It was batten down the hatches, everything's going to zero. And then 3 months, after me starting and seeing this sort of just craziness, we went in the total opposite direction and then just had the craziest bull run for a few years. And so it's been a very interesting time to be, start a career in VC because we've seen a lot of ups and downs. Very, very quickly.
You've seen a very high peak and possibly experienced quite recently a heck of a trough too. It's really interesting. I'm looking forward to talking about that with you. I want to go back to a bit of your early journey though, actually. I think one thing that's going to be really useful for some of the people listening, I think venture capital is a really attractive career to people for many ways. I think someone said it on this a long time ago that VCs pick the world we live in next. And I think when you operate in a fund with $1 billion under management, there's definitely some truth to that, because you guys are you gatekeep the capital that allows these visionaries and entrepreneurs to bring those new visions into the world. So quite literally, you create the world that we live in next. So I think for that reason and the impact that you can create, I think it's incredibly, incredibly attractive, as well as I think for me, like the way that your job is structured as well. Like you're on the correct side of the table of like asking and receiving for money, receiving money. You're on the side of actually giving it and being able to give it. So you have the optionality, you have the choice, you have the intellectual challenge of picking the right one rather than the one with the scarcity, which is a nice place to sit. So there's lots of advantages to it, and maybe you can go into some of the reasons you picked it more specifically. But my actual question at this point is that so many people want to be in VC, and so many people wait for a job to come up and they apply for it. And I see this. I was speaking to someone from Octopus the other day. Like they had an analyst job come up, and they had like 1,000. I can't remember, it was hundreds or maybe even like over 1,000 applicants for and that's regular, and expecting to stand out with a regular application to a regular job comes up that comes up is not what you did. I think your journey is really interesting because you're right. It's not regular. It's irregular the way that you've got there. But I think the way that you casually brush over some of these things that I think are really important for people when they're trying to create optionality for themselves, in that you mentioned a lot, you used the word talking to people, you used that term a lot, like became friends with, you glossed over it relatively quickly, but that's actually quite an important thing. That's quite a skilled thing to do, is noticing like, okay, who's in and around the position that I actually want, and who are the people of influence there? Who are the people that are going to be checking those applications? And actually, who are the people that can frankly just create a job for me? And, you know, that term becoming friends, again, an interesting one, because actually you're not literally becoming friends with them. You're actually showing them the best side of you, and you're trying to find a way to put yourself on their radar, show that you're competent, lead with your best foot, all of these things. And so I want to just ask you, I guess, a bit more of the sort of practicality around how you actually did that. What is your framework? What are you thinking? How do you consider that stuff of like, I want to create an option for myself here. Here's what I'm going to do. Like, talk me through very practically, if you can, like how you went about that to get your break.
So at the start, I didn't have a structured process or way to think about this. I actually just happened to become friends with a couple of people who were VCs. So two of the guys who were VCs, like they were in my wedding, and sort of stuff. So like truly, it wasn't, oh, I have this master plan. It was oh, well, I'm interacting. And this was when I was in Boston, and it was like, there were just like a group of guys I became friends with who all had different careers. I was, in the software development side. There were a couple people who were VCs. There were some people who work at startups. There was a guy who worked in real estate, who were all just sort of young and hungry, and we didn't have families and we didn't have kids at the time. Like it just was we just ended up hanging out a lot. And it was the classic, like, hang out because we enjoy hanging out. And it was a mix of like, we could talk about work and what was going on, but it was also just like, we generally enjoyed hanging out with each other. So I think for a lot of relationship building at this point, I think probably how I've always approached it, I am someone who would rather go deep with a small handful of people versus wide with a lot. And people have different ways that they operate, different things that like get them excited and give them energy. I'm a former salesperson. Like I can go to the conference, I can meet a bunch of people, I can turn myself into different people based off of like who's on the other side of the table, because that's what selling is. But I personally enjoy more the like getting to know someone in a deep and impactful way. I think so. I didn't have some master plan. I just happened to actually become friends with a couple people. But then as I was thinking about making the transition, and I probably did this a lot when I was at Nomad and even at the software consulting as well, like I constantly was just trying to find like, who are the people who are in the job I want to have, or a couple steps further ahead of me. So it was like when I was on the sales side, it was like, who are the people that are the chief growth officers or the VPs of sales that like I can sit and learn from and try to get connected to, and to do that. And I think probably as I thought about it on the, starting to make the transition to the VC side, I went to a small handful of people that I knew and just asked them to introduce me to people and said, hey, I'm thinking about this. I see you're connected. I know you're connected to so and so. Do you think you can make a connection to me there as well? And I still do that today. Like a lot of my job is trying to find either great entrepreneurs or be able to get smart on markets. So most calls I get off, like, well, should I talk to? If you're not pitching me, I'm asking, and I'll ask this when we stop recording. Are there any entrepreneurs or people who are really great and early that I should be starting to get to know today? One of my friends and partners at the firm likes to say, no's are free. So it never hurts to ask for those types of things. And some people, no, I don't know anyone, but if it does say yes, it's easy. So I think in general, I'm of the mindset of, I like to always ask to get introduced to other people because it's great from a network building perspective. It's also how I learn, is through conversations. I find it to be one of the most useful ways to do that. So I think I probably, without really thinking about it, started to do that as I thought about making the jump into VC. And I just would ask for the introduction to the next person, and then I can talk more about it. But and then I would just prepare maniacally for those conversations.
Interesting.
in the vein of, again, trying to always position myself, even if there wasn't a job there, how do I position myself well to, if there is a job, to be well set up for that, and position myself well to be at the end of a 30-minute conversation when I say, hey, James, is there anyone else I should talk to? Or, hey, I saw that you're connected to XYZ fund. You've co-invested with them. I'm really interested in their thesis about Y or their portfolio company X. Would you mind making an introduction? That someone on the other side is able to say, oh, sure. That's an easy enough thing for me to do. No real master plan, but probably just around the, continually asking and trying to make it easy for someone to say yes.
I agree. And actually, well, the bit I want to highlight there is the preparation, because I think, firstly, I think people are afraid to receive a no, especially receive a no from someone that is further down the line or is above them or is that kind of thing. And I think getting over that fear of rejection is huge. I can remember when I first partnered up with Alex, the guy that I ran the accelerators with and the funds with. He'd done a lot of entrepreneurship before, and he had and sold businesses prior, and I was not. I was coming straight from medicine. The first thing he had me do was email 100 professors at universities, and get 98 rejections by email to join an advisory board for an accelerator. And he knew at the time, like, what is this guy? What am I going to learn from that? And I'll be honest, I hated it. I hated receiving that no. I was like, now they've got an email with my name in it and they've said no and they don't like me anymore. They forgot about the email the second after they pressed send. They do not remember who the heck I am. It's irrelevant. They never knew me anyway. It doesn't affect me. But I learned, I got 98 no's out of 100, but I got 2 yeses actually, by the way. And then we had an advisory board for an accelerator that didn't exist yet, with 2 professors from good universities on it. So like, facing that no and learning no is such a key for entrepreneurship, isn't it? It's absolutely wild how important that is. But the preparation is the other one. Like, this is how to make it easy to say yes to someone. Because if I say to you, having you on this podcast, if I after we stop recording say that, Sam, actually I had a look at your your portfolio as one of the things that I looked at, and your approach actually, and I saw that you invest in health. We're a media partner for health actually, and like I was thinking, the scale that they've had, we've got an events function to what we do. It'd be interesting to have a conversation actually about potentially what we could do together, because we've got grand ambitions along a similar route but slightly different. You might be interested in it.
Yeah.
I think that's a far easier yes than like, hey, can we have a meeting about investing in me? You've never heard of me, but like, Can we have a meeting? And that preparation thing is really key. I find it really difficult saying no to people. Like, generally, I hate saying no. I recently put out a thing on LinkedIn that was like, hey, I'm looking for like 10 people to join a WhatsApp group that I can just get some feedback on my podcast, because I find it difficult to like connect with people through the podcast. The system doesn't work. Like, I want 10 people. Loads of people came in and said they wanted to come. And I feel really bad now. Like, how do I make this work? And like, So as long as you frame and ask to me correctly, I'm going to find it really difficult to say no. You make it easy to say yes all of a sudden, because the preparation that you show me is I know that's the preparation you're going to show the next person, and I'm not going to wreck a good a good relationship with a bad introduction, but I'm going to strengthen a relationship with a good introduction. And so actually it shows me on that side. And I'm sure you now in a similar position experience something similar. But yeah, honestly, man, that preparation piece, I think it sounds so simple, but it's so important. I see so many TikToks and stuff of like the business gurus saying this, but it really makes a huge difference and just increases your yeses massively. And
it's surprising. I've run a bunch of interview processes at Primary and beforehand, but I think at Primary in particular, there's stuff you can look at. You should come in prepared. We have a 30-minute conversation. You've been selected out of, one of the hundreds, if not thousands of applications to have a conversation. And I'm still often surprised at the lack of preparation for those conversations and things like that, because I still have a bunch of stuff. Like, I would look at every fund and I'm like, okay, this is an enterprise fund. Okay, this is what I'm going to pitch. Okay, this is what it would be. And like, this is my thesis around these different types of things. And most of the time I would never use it, but it ended up being when I did, it was really impactful. And it would also be something that I'd often say, okay, great. I really love that conversation. We talked about XYZ. Why don't you, I'll send you some stuff I wrote about this. I'll do something like try to just get some edge, some way to break out from the pack in a world that is very competitive. I still wake up every day and know that there are thousands of people that want my job. And you kind of have to approach the world in that way. And I think if you're going to come in and try to, get a job in VC, you have to be approaching it in the exact same way.
Yeah, I've got a funny story in this actually. There's I don't know how proud I am of this. I sort of am and I aren't, but I'll tell it anyway. That when I was preparing to meet someone who was significantly far above me in the chain, who I wanted something from basically back in the accelerator days, I text one of my friends who was connected to him on LinkedIn. They actually worked at the same company, who's way higher up. And I said, like, can you get me any information that you have on this guy? Like literally anything. And he was like, dude, the only thing I can see is that he's a member of like the snowboarding club here at this massive company. And again, like, don't know how proud I am of this, but I do snowboard. I hadn't been snowboarding since like the previous season. But as soon as I got on the call, this guy, he was like, oh, the usual pleasantries of like, hey, how's it going? I was like, oh yeah, I've just got back from Morsey and like had a really, really good trip. He was like, oh, what, do you ski or snowboard? I was like, oh, I am an avid snowboarder. But then once I got the conversation on snowboarding, we had 15 minutes on snowboarding and then I got what I wanted. But like, yeah, as I say, I don't know how proud I am of that. But you do what you can, I think, in entrepreneurship.
You do what you can, and most people won't do that. And I think that's the thing. And whether it's something personal or whether it's work related or whatever it might be, it's just taking that, doing a little bit of extra work.
Definitely. The other thing I just want to touch on in your journey, I think it's such a. I was going to say unicorn. I mean, you went from 0 to 75 million in the startup, right, where you were like had the sales role. I think it's the jackpot. That was what I was going to say. It's hitting the jackpot. That's what people that join a startup really want. They want, if you want to get the full startup experience, you need the growth, right? And to see something go from 0 to 75 million revenue. I think you say your job changed every 6 months. I think that's fascinating to have seen. It gives you such a great view of all the different sizes of company, but having seen it in the same company, my question for you is, based on what you saw then and what you know now of being a VC, how do the founders and the CEOs, I imagine they're exactly the same thing in the early days, but how do they cope with the job changing every 6 months? Because for them, it changes significally. And they've never run a company that size from month to month. It's something that I've talked about on this podcast a little bit before. Yeah. How do organizations cope with growth that quick from a leadership perspective? And I guess even as an investor now, do you ever have to step in and just say to those founders, like, you were really good at starting it, but I'm not quite sure you're right at the next point?
We could probably have a whole podcast talking just about a whole episode just talking about this. Being that, so I haven't been the CEO of a venture scale business, done, smaller things as we chatted about. Being a CEO of a fast growing business, I think it's the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, from what I can see. And, we spent a lot of time and we've just seen it a lot of, from a mental health perspective, it's very challenging to be a CEO in the venture world, because there's just so much pressure. You have to be on all of the time. And once you take venture capital dollars, you are on the hamster wheel of saying, it's not just I'm going to own my own destiny and to do this. Like I'm running the business. I'm expected to run the business in a way that assumes that I'm going to run out of money in some period of time, and I have to go out and raise more capital and to continue to build this. So it's a different, I think running any business, venture backed or not, is very stressful, but it's a different level of stress. You put yourself into an environment that is like designed to try to build companies really, really quickly. which is not normal for most businesses in the US or in the world. I think how we see some of the best CEOs doing this, it's really around building support systems for themselves, and then being honest with themselves when they've outgrown said support systems and need to up level and shift and change. And that's a hard thing to do. And I think the support systems are, come in different ways. And I think, when we think about really fantastic CEOs, there's a couple of things we look for that like get to this a little bit. One is like adaptability and like the rate of learning. One of the other things is like being really obsessed with talent and understanding the value of surrounding yourself with really, really amazing people. I think if you're a CEO building a fast growing business, like one of the most impactful things to do is to be okay with delegating and letting go of these things. You're the CEO of the 5-person business. You're doing everything. The CEO of the 50-person business. You better not be doing everything. Like you have to let go of a bunch of things. And the difference of hiring that exceptional person 6 months beforehand versus today can make the world a difference and make your life easier and give you more support. I think we talk a lot about the don't think about solving the problem you have today. Think about the problem you're going to have in 12 months. So I think we see some of the best CEOs doing that with their teams and building support systems around that, and then building support systems outside of that as well. We encourage all of our CEOs to have coaches. We encourage them to be, and we'll actually, in a lot of the term sheets, we will actually give people non-dilutive capital to go hire a coach and say, we're going to give you additional capital to go do this because we think it's so important. We encourage people to join CEO groups and then find advisors and the people who are a couple steps ahead of you to help you think through that. And as the investors, we try to be that call as well. That first or second call when, shit has hit the fan around how do you go out and solve that? And how do we think about fixing this problem? Once we've invested, we're on the same side of the table. So the last thing we want to do is be in a position where it's like, oh, you're couching the feedback. You're not doing this. And I think whether it's investors or not, again, the CEOs find different support systems to figure out how they can continue to learn and iterate and feel comfortable as their role shifts in a pretty fundamental way.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of my Roman empires is that Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook when he was 19, and how young he was, how inexperienced he was. He hasn't had a job other than founding Facebook, a listed biggest tech company in the world type thing. And he never got ousted. He was just back to know and learn and grow and all the thing through it. So again, I kind of think do we often over egg this sometimes? And if someone like that can just become the CEO of Facebook, having never CEO'd before or even done anything else, then maybe it's about something that I'm not quite aware of. Maybe it's belief. Maybe it is just what you're born with. But you're right. I think support system is huge. I mean, I can't imagine how many people that those investors would have insisted were around him, teaching him stuff. But yeah,
it's interesting. It's a journey. I think we talk about and think about it internally around this idea of there's a journey from being a founder to becoming a CEO. And that's a challenging journey as you think about building and scaling. And sometimes people are really, really great at it. Sometimes, and this happens at a lot of businesses, and sometimes people aren't interested as the business continues to scale of making that transition. It's funny you mentioned Mark Zuckerberg. I get an email from a partner of mine who runs everything from a people side on our end and works with the founders in our portfolio. She's a former chief people officer, and I'm looking at their screen so I can read this. She was saying she was having a conversation last week with a guy who's sort of an OG Silicon Valley executive coach, and he's coached people like Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey and Drew Houston and many, many others. And he has a framework around the key differentiators between what's a very successful founder and unsuccessful founders, being driven by or being defined as success as being like you've returned 10x money on invested capital to investors. So these are unicorn businesses. And the five things that he said that, things fall into five buckets. One was adaptability. Two is working through others, excuse me. Three is discipline scaling. Four is personal grounding. And five is self-awareness, around this like idea of how do you build and grow and go from being a founder when we're writing that original check to being a Mark Zuckerberg, or someone of that level. And it's just a really interesting framework to start to continue to think about. And we have buckets of these, but it's...
what does discipline scaling mean?
The way that he talks about it is around focus, and saying, what are the key things that I need to do? Startups, right? There's a million things you can do.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the challenges that we have are being like, there's 15, 20, 1,000 shiny objects. What's the like one or two things you need to do really well? And then being able to communicate those priorities well, set the right goals and expectations to do that, and then hold everyone accountable. Being like, did I actually do this or did I not? And I think it's an easy thing to do, for founders and for CEOs to think, well, I didn't exactly hit this goal, but like it's yellow. It might not be green, but like yellow's okay. It's not red. And yeah, there's 14 things we did. We did all of them yellow, so we're doing okay. Versus saying, what's the one thing that matters, or two things that matter over the next, 12 to 18 months. We talk a lot about internally, like what's the North Star metric?
Someone says this to me a lot when I start talking about wacky ideas and all these things that we could do. They say this to me so often, which is, do you know how many, can you imagine how many things that the founders of WhatsApp could have done with WhatsApp?
Totally.
But it was just a very, very good text messaging platform from one person to either one other person or to many in groups. And that is it. Like, just stop with your ideas, focus, and just increase your revenue with the thing that you're already good at. Like, which is so true. I mean, can you imagine how many things WhatsApp could have done?
Totally.
Oh God. Yeah. No, it's so important.
It's important to have all of the ideas and be thinking about that, because I think if you're, especially in a venture-backed business, you need to iterate. You need to be open to change. You need to be willing to take these big swings and make these bets. But like, you also have to be maniacal around the idea of being like saying no to 98% of the things that pop up. So the bar is just incredibly high. Where like, if we're not going to be focused on the core thing, how do we, what's that bar to be able to like say yes to that? And you hear a lot of stories about great CEOs, and we see this around, like that's what they did.
So let's talk about the fund, and we can start here. So at Primary, what do you look for when a CEO comes in for that very first meeting, the founder, the CEO, etc.? When they come in for those the co-founders, however you do your meetings, what are you looking for?
So it's all the classic stuff from looking for a large market, looking for a unique insight, as I'm sure you've, all of those different types of things. Why is it, what's the why now around building XYZ product? And why are you, James, the right person to do that? And often, it depends on the industry and stuff like that, but it's often I've lived this industry, I've lived this problem, or I've become obsessed with it. And here, these are the 100 conversations I had with, dental assistants, because I realized that like I can fundamentally shift their job. I think on the CEO side, we look for a lot of the things that this coach talked about in a lot of ways. We look very closely and think a lot about rate of learning. What's the rate of learning? How do people learn? Because startups are never a straight path. And how self-aware are you around what do you really have conviction in and what do you not have conviction in? And are you willing to make make the hard decisions when those things pop up. So I think we try to, as quickly as possible, I often start with like, what's your story, more so than anything else, because I want to sort of understand the person, and then like, how did you get here, and what did you think was true 3 months ago or 4 months ago that isn't true today, and like, how did you get to that learning? So I'll often have that conversation before we even like get into the business, to try to say like, what, like, you're doing something that's in a lot of ways irrational if you look at the data. Starting an early stage startup is incredibly hard. You are, from a probabilistic standpoint, going to fail. So the like, what's given you conviction to go out and do this, and like, how do you learn, and what does that look like? So I think we think a lot about that. And then it's going into the business, and how, like, what are you building? Why does it matter? All of those types of things, and trying to weave that in. I think oftentimes, especially in the healthcare side, there's a lot of really interesting businesses that should be built. A lot of them aren't venture scaled. So I think we see a lot of people who are like, really interesting idea. Is this $1 billion business as a standalone company? Maybe and I don't know what sports analogy to use, but I'll use a golf one. It's a triple breaker putt. If every one of these things, or happens, or it's a bank shot, or whatever it might be, then it's the really big business. And sometimes that can be true, but like, we want to like understand, why does that work, and how does that flow?
I think there's a lot of people that assume they want or need VC money, and it's a strange one. I remember talking a little while ago about this, where this concept where, in order to create products that make a big difference, VC money is required. But in the UK, for example, even if that product is successful, or to even then achieve the level of success to return those VCs their money or profit, it needs to achieve such scale that I'm not sure the product is that relevant internationally.
Yeah.
At that scale to take over everything. So actually, I think there's so many things that could improve healthcare that kind of need a different model. But for those that are actually in the middle of the Venn diagram that need that VC money, it makes all the difference. And actually, the international scale that you're then getting is what changes the world. I think it is just quite a small subset of all the ideas.
VC is about hyperscaling. At the end of the day, if you're taking the VC dollars, it's because you believe there's an opportunity to scale and grow a company really, really quickly. And that's unique. And as we chatted about earlier on, like, you also put yourself on this flywheel of saying, to do that, you need to continue to raise capital. We're a seed stage firm. We're investing in the first institutional round. You will have to go through and continue to raise capital continually as you go out and build the business. And I think one of the other things we, in that vein, think a lot about and try to suss out in early conversations is the CEO's ability to sell stock. And in a lot of ways, there's 3 core jobs. In a lot of ways, you're like setting the strategy as a CEO, you're raising capital, which is selling stock, and you're hiring great people, which is selling stock. And that comes in a lot of different types. You don't have to be a salesperson necessarily, but like, you have to be able to get someone excited and convinced. So there's lots of different archetypes around that. But that's something we think a lot about very early on in any process that we're talking to someone.
I often think that's why clinician founders find things difficult sometimes, having spoken to a lot of them here and elsewhere, is that we're evidence-based creatures. And so when we talk about imagined value, it can be quite difficult and jarring, because we will answer things in a very realistic way, and we'll caveat everything. Well, it could be worth this one day if this and this and this and this and this, whereas actually the true visionary says it will be worth this one day, and let me tell you exactly why. It's difficult in healthcare, matching sort of ambition with evidence base, and then being able to communicate that to sell stock. But you're right, that's what's needed. That's the model in which this whole thing works. And so yeah, it's kind of something to get over. And back to that self-awareness piece, if that is the weakness, it needs to be worked on. We talk about it in the UK a lot, like the quality of people from the US and their ability to communicate and present and sell eclipses the UK because we're more reserved and honest. And we do talk about this a lot here. And I know, like, that, they're very American in the way that they do X or say X or present X is a massive compliment sometimes, like, especially in this world, of how good people from the US often are at selling. Well, that's certainly our perception sometimes. From a thesis perspective, on your healthcare side, I know a lot of funds care more about a certain customer, or they define their thesis around certain product types or indeed certain business models. Do you guys have a preference or a focus, or are you kind of happy to look at everything?
Yeah, so we're early stage investors. So in a lot of ways, like, with all of this, we spent an immense amount of time talking about the founders. Like, we're betting on the founders. We're investing in the founders more so than anything else. We have areas where we spend a lot of time and have hypotheses around how the world is going to work and do that. But at its core, it's about the people. I think we've thought a lot about over the last couple of years around where are the right opportunities to build venture scale businesses in healthcare, especially balancing this reality that if you go back and look at the vast majority of outcomes in healthcare, in health tech, they're services businesses. They're tech-enabled services businesses that are more capital intensive. They're harder to scale. And as an early stage investor, it can be a hard thing for us to balance because, great, we're investing in these early rounds, we're doing this, but to maintain that position, we're going to have to invest an immense amount of capital over time for these companies to scale. And getting to $100 million of revenue, if you're a tech-enabled services business, is not the right bar. It's not the same as the software business because you get valued in a different way. You have to kind of be thinking about how do you become a $500 million revenue business, $1 billion revenue business over time, which takes more time as you think about it. Thematically, we believe there are really interesting opportunities in the tech-enabled services side, but I think we have to see, we want to see opportunities and opportunities that ideally have a little bit more of an asset light model. Some of these are these more network oriented models, these MSOs and things like that, that become easier to scale. And then I think we think a lot about when we're looking at that camp, who's the founder? Do they have the ability to go out and execute? In a lot of ways, this is an execution problem for some of these earlier stage companies. You're not reinventing how nephrology care is delivered necessarily. You might be doing it in a slightly different way and delivering it differently, but you're not changing the clinical pathways more often than not. And then are those founders, if you check those two boxes, being they have a strategy that isn't so capital intensive, they're the right people to go out and build and execute this. Are they thinking about how much capital they actually need? And when you look at a lot of the tech-enabled businesses in healthcare that have grown, they actually haven't grown or been built in traditional venture ways. They've often been built by raising more capital up front, been built alongside a strategic or a corporate in the early days, have been the combination of multiple different businesses. We looked at healthcare unicorn exits over the last 15 years, and about 75% of those exits fall into that camp. They did not go into a seed, a Series A, a Series B, a Series C. So we do a chunk of incubation work here at Primary. So we think a lot about these tech-enabled services businesses, how do you recreate those scenarios? And then on the software side, I love vertical SaaS. And I think there's a lot of opportunities in healthcare to build large businesses. I think we're thinking today a lot around, and have over the last couple of years, where are there opportunities to unbundle some of the incumbents, and where are there opportunities to leverage some of the new technological innovations to build not a product that's a 2x improvement, but a 10x improvement to someone's current workflow. And it's if you can do that, do you believe someone can get over the switching cost of saying, I'm no longer going to use Change Healthcare for, this part of the payment integrity stack. Lots of people are willing to switch off of Change Healthcare today because of everything that happened. Like, I'm willing to make that shift and make that change.
Are there many of those opportunities?
I think there are. I think you have to believe more often than not that you're building towards a platform. So you're starting with something where if you did the traditional venture thing, you'd be like, the TAM looks way too small here. But you believe that there's a interesting opportunity to just expand naturally. Where you're like, it's not actually a triple breaking pot here. You're like, it's just like, it's a very natural thing. James, is on the payment integrity team, is already solving XYZ problem, and this is the next step in his workflow. Great, I can go and solve this as well, and that keeps expanding the team. There's not a ton, and more often than not, we're looking at businesses where the leaps are seem too large to us. We're wrong. I'm wrong all the time. So it's like one of these things where it's totally fine. It's like, we're low volume. I'll do a couple deals a year. So we say no to lots of great businesses all the time.
Yeah, fair. One thing I wanted to mention, or at least talk about with you, is having looked at your website and the way that you do things. A lot of funds talk about their founder first, right? A lot of funds say they support founders. You've got a lot of kind of evidence on there of exactly how you do it, and you're very sort of direct about, like, we've got a hiring team, for example. Like, we'll literally help you hire an entire team of blah. We've got people in our fund that will help you do the next round, and we've got these investors and we've got these relationships. You're very clear in sort of the way that you do that, which I think is very nice. How competitive is the VC environment for the good investments at the moment, and how much does that stuff matter when you're getting to sort of term sheets with good founders?
Sure. I think for great deals, it's highly competitive.
Is it?
And continues to be highly competitive. And I think over the last few years, what you've seen in the part of the capital stack that we play in, early stage, seed stage, you have a lot of the multi-stage firm coming down and continuing to come down and saying, we're willing to write this check. And they just have a different calculus. And I have lots of friends who work for those funds, and they're great. The $4 million check, if you're investing out of a $2 billion fund, is less meaningful. We have $1 billion under management. We're investing out of a $280 million fund. I'll do a small handful of deals. I partner with, a small number of companies each year. It's very, very meaningful on our end. But you can pull different levers. You can, give, it's less dilution, more capital, less dilution. Can be compelling for certain founders. I think we think about the model on our side, and if you look at early stage seed funds, we're the largest pure play seed fund from a headcount perspective in the world. We have 50 full-time people. There's 13 investors. There's over 30 people who are focused on working with the portfolio. And practically what that means is that the partners, the investors, I make less money.
Yeah, this is the thing with management fees. Yes.
It's the management fees. It's like you could take all those 30 people's salaries, and those are management fees, and they could go into the investors' pockets. And that's a totally fine way to run the business and do that. I think we think about it a little more about being like, if we're really going to lean in and be helpful, instead of having me, the ex-sales guy, be the one who's like, when I built sales team 4.5 years ago, and pontificate around what that looks like, let's have people who still live and breathe and do this all day, every day. And that is going to be more valuable. You're going to be able to get people who are better at it than I was. And in a lot of ways, it goes back to like the classic Jeff Bezos quote about like, your margin is my opportunity. Your management fees are, my opportunity in some ways, and it takes time, and it's not right for every founder. Some people it doesn't click with them. The most interesting insight that we've had over the last couple of years, though, is that the people who leverage our impact team, and we do this around go-to-market, we do it around people, strategic finance, are the people who leverage it the most are multi-time founders. they're the ones who've gone through the journey beforehand and are like, this shit is hard. Like early stage company building is hard. Why would I not want as much help as I can get? And they're the ones who raise their hands and say, when are you going to tell me to stop raising my hand? I say, look, if you're a Series B business, like you have resources, you have different things. But if you're an early stage company, you just keep raising your hand. And we believe that it's a different product. It's a different selling point. Some people it resonates with, some people it doesn't. But we're very committed to leaning in and trying to help in a bit of a different way.
Yeah, it's really interesting that about keep raising your hand. I remember when I was running accelerators, people used to ask me for advice of like, oh, I've got into blah accelerator. Like, what's your advice having run them? And I always used to say the same thing, which is just remember, accelerators are not democracies.
Totally.
Whoever's running that accelerator is going to put most of their effort on A, the people that ask for it, and B, the people who look most like they're going to be successful. So make sure you're both. Make sure you're shouting and screaming about your successes and what you need to realize those successes, and you'll get all of the attention. Like, it is not a democracy. You probably know this from your incubation stuff as well. The interesting thing about spending management fees, because you're right, like a 2 and 20 model, like, yeah, you'll take a 2% management fee on the size of the fund, and yeah, you'll pay that in salaries and office. That's sort of like the classic, and you'll take a nice big salary and blah, blah, blah. But to that point, I love that. Your margin is my opportunity. It's exactly when we were raising a fund back in the day, how we did it. We took minimal salaries, because at the end of the day, it's a form of skin in the game, isn't it? Because what you're saying is, I'm going to take a sacrifice on salary, and I'm just going to pump all of that money into the success of our companies, and I'll take my slice because we will get over the hurdle rate and we're going to realize all of the carry. So actually, yeah, okay, I might have less money today, but if I invest all that money myself in the success of the companies, I'm going to receive it back in carry at the end of the day. So there's no real problem here. It's just that it's sort of and it's funny, like when we saw it in first principles when we were looking at the model, and we were just asking that inverted commas stupid question of like, why doesn't everyone do this? Why is everyone taking it as salary? And then you realize like it's just an old model, and like there's short-term thinking and like all these different things. And I think, yeah, it's more sort of entrepreneurial way of looking at it, of just literally first principles of like, well, hold on, why wouldn't I just pay the money to invest and make sure that they're successful, and even cash it out Series A or something, and just at least get something back at that. But like, I don't know, there's loads of ways that you could model it, I guess.
Totally.
But, yeah, absolutely fascinating. Final question before I let you go is anything that you are particularly bullish on at the moment from a healthcare market type of company, type of product, type of technology perspective? Are you an LLM evangelist? Are you ditching the entire portfolio to like just shout LLMs as hard as you can and invest in the first 10 people that come to you? Like
primary.ai.
Exactly. Yeah. Are you swapping yourself for an AI? Is that the future of VC? Yeah. What are you what are you excited about at the minute?
Continue to believe that AI is going to revolutionize every industry. And I think we're in the first inning here in a lot of ways. And I think there are going to be an immense amount of opportunity. So we spend a lot of time as a fund thinking about that across every sector. And it's one of the advantages, like I spend all my time doing early stage healthcare investing. We have partners who spend time in every other sector, and partners who spend all the time doing infrastructure and AI investing and things like that. And the learnings from that and being, okay, this is starting to happen here. How do we think it applies to healthcare? We think a lot about that. I also am pretty obsessed with, on the healthcare side, network-oriented models. So network businesses, and think that if you look at a lot of the large healthcare businesses built over the last decade, they're built in those models where you are providing a service value to someone, but ultimately you're monetizing that in a different way. And if you think about it, hospitals are big business. They don't have a lot of margin to play with and things like that. So if you can be providing software to a clinician for free and monetizing it in a different way, and you have all these VBC enablement businesses that did this for the last decade, you have businesses like Doximity, which is a business, similar in a similar sort of network model. I think there's not a lot of places where that works, but if you can figure that out, they tend to be highly scalable, highly capital efficient and very, very defensible. And so I think we think a lot about that. We have a handful of businesses in our portfolio that do that, or have taken that sort of business model. And I love finding opportunities that look like that in healthcare. I'm going to go deliver a lot of value to Dr. X, to Administrator Y, and not ask a lot from them up front, but figure out a way to monetize it on the backside.
Awesome. So it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. For people that want to learn more about Primary or yourself, want to get in touch to ask you any questions, what's the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, primary.vc is the website. My email is, no surprise, sam@primary.vc. Shoot me an email. I'm on LinkedIn. I don't check Twitter, or X, formerly known as Twitter, very frequently, but I'm pretty easy to get in touch with. I won't give you my cell phone number, but if you shoot me an email, I tend to be pretty responsive.
Awesome. Sam, pleasure, mate. Thank you so much.